This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joie.
Brought to you by MediaTek. Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joie, and today is Friday, November 11th, 2022, and we're at the MediaTek Summit here in Sonoma. I'm with James Chen, who's the guru of all things Wi-Fi and 5G.
Thank you, Miriam. Appreciate that.
It's good to have you on the show again.
Always good to be on your show.
So, you announced a new chip for 5G, like essentially a modem subsystem, like more than a modem, right? Mm-hmm. The T800. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to talk about that. But I also kind of want to get your feel for like where things are going with Wi-Fi 7. There's a demo here that I saw. There's like, it's amazing. I mean, it's 14 gigabits per second.
That's right. First time ever, right?
I know.
Yeah.
So basically, I thought we'd cover some of that stuff because I think it's kind of amazing what, this kind of duality of 5G and Wi-Fi 7 brings to the table, especially for home internet, which I think is kind of the unsung hero right now of 5G.
Yes, absolutely agree. I think we're seeing the same thing. 5G for home broadband really is taken off. I think by some estimates, people are saying in just a scant 3 years, about 20% of the population of households, not population, will actually have a 5G broadband connection to their home. I mean, and we haven't seen these uptakes, for a long, long time. So yeah, you're absolutely correct. I think 5G, this is one area where it really distances itself from 4G in terms of applications, right?
Right.
And, I think that's great.
I think what's interesting to me is that for the first time, really, if you cannot get fiber to someone, or our cable is kind of getting old now, but it keeps improving. Let's give it a chance. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, you want something like fiber. You want to get to gigabit kind of speeds, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you get that in a home? Like right now, really, if you can't get fiber, you might get cable and it's not that great. Your DSL's not even in the picture. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's Starlink, but really, realistically, especially in an urban environment, 5G is the solution, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, once 5G, we're still kind of nascent in this whole 5G thing. It doesn't seem like it is, but it is, right? These networks take years and years, but their 5G capabilities will, get better and better as well. For example, the modems, mm-hmm. i.e. our chips, will support more advanced features to get the speed up to gigabit class. I think that's all there. I think it's just time.
For sure. So what does T800 bring to the table that we didn't see in T700?
Great question. So T800 is a thin modem. So it could be applied to like a PC, to a car. It could be an industrial Internet of Things device, like a machine, if you want to connect a robot, for example, to 5G. So what it does is on speed, it for sub-6, it's almost 8 gigabits. So it's almost double of what we did in T700. Mm-hmm. And we also now on T800 support millimeter wave.
Right, that's a huge deal.
Right.
For some applications.
Some applications.
Like especially, North American carriers, some of them. For home internet, there is going to be some potential for millimeter wave, maybe.
Maybe.
And then, of course, industrial application, I think, is a good example, right? Like, as you said, the robots. Mm-hmm. It's interesting to me, there wasn't a lot of emphasis in the summit about industrial 5G. Like, I think it's something that, obviously my audience is consumers, but they're all a bunch of nerds, right, guys? So, you're going to be interested in industrial 5G. The idea that a business doesn't have to constantly, if they want to rearrange their factory floor, doesn't have to rewire everything, right?
Exactly.
It's like their robot is 5G, the whatever else is 5G, the conveyor belt, all of that can just be moved around a little bit without having to rerun all the network connections and know that it's going to be bulletproof. That solution probably would work for that.
Absolutely. Right? And the inherent security of 5G networks, right? So, and it's dedicated spectrum, not unlicensed spectrum. There's a lot of factors that would play into 5G being a force in industrial applications. So we didn't talk about it much at the summit. You're correct. But hey, that's why we keep having these things year after year.
I know. I'm just bringing it up because I feel like it's kind of one of the things that people don't think about for 5G. They might think of V2V maybe, like vehicle-to-vehicle 5G, which really doesn't quite exist yet. It's been tested, but they might obviously think of home internet. They obviously think of their smartphones, of their laptops, of their any set-top boxes and hotspots they might have. But they don't really think of.
They don't. You're right.
And so I think the interesting part is that this chip can kind of do it all in that sense. Where do you think consumers are going to see this chip most likely?
I think in any computing device, if,
like a laptop, for example,
anything of that nature. I think because it's a thin modem. It's a thin modem. Really, it's a advanced modem. Let's say so. It could be in laptops. Like I said, a variant of this could also be in a car.
Okay, right? Yeah, right.
Because I think 5G, 4G, actually 3G really made its inroads into cars. And 4G now is in almost all new vehicles, and I think it's just a matter of time before 5G really happens.
The funny thing about it, actually, you brought up cars, is most people that have a car with 3G right now are kind of SOL, as it were.
That's right.
It's like, so I'm actually thinking 4G is not far behind in some ways, because I know like T-Mobile's already refarming 4G for 5G. So you'd want a 5G. Like if you're a car maker today and you want to have a car that at least is usable in terms of telematics for 5+ years, you probably want to start with 5G right now, right?
Absolutely. Plus, the automotive market, their product life cycles, development cycles are typically longer. So they have to think ahead and plan ahead. So you're right. All the stars are aligned for 5G for automotive, right?
So, okay. So we talk about consumer tech. So laptops, automotive. Of course, then there is home internet, CPEs, right? And do you see hotspot use as well potentially with this chip?
Well, for home internet and hotspot or things like that, it's the T830 chip that we announced in August, because they integrated the CPU, just makes it a lot more compact and powerful platform. For thin modem, you don't. It's just a thin.
Yeah, you don't need to drive a display like you would on a hotspot, maybe, or
you don't need to run a big software stack. That stack is run off the chip. For example, in a car's own CPU system. Sure. But there'll be new applications for thin modems. For example, think about wearables. Right. Because now you have wearable watches that are. Do
you see the
4G,
T800? No, that's not for a watch.
No,
right?
I think for wearables, really, your bandwidth requirement shouldn't. Let's just say right now in 2022 shouldn't be that high. So there's something called RedCap that the industry has standardized for reduced capability. So that would be isn't that
Great
cute?
Name.
Reduced capability, And I think we think that's the primary the standard for more wearables, because the performance envelope profile fits that form factor a lot better.
Is that like a subset of 5G, like kind of like minimum case scenario for power efficiency and stuff like on
you
this
got
device?
it, just like the name suggests, reduced capability.
Cool.
Actually,
I didn't even know that existed. James.
Yeah. See, that's why we're
on your
show.
The show.
Exactly. RedCap. Now your users know it. RedCap. Not what you wear on your head, but reduced capability. RedCap.
That's awesome. Cool. So, okay, I think we've gone through almost all the scenarios the T800 might be used in. And of course, you had millimeter wave. The first device you had was the Dimensity 1050. And now you've got the Dimensity 9200, which I'm going to talk with Finbar about. And you have the T800. So that's actually, it's kind of like growing. And that's, again, it's just weird to me that I don't feel like it's necessarily. But I feel like, at least this market with one other carriers, it's a big deal. Yeah. And you kind of have to have it, even if you don't sell a device with it enabled, right? You can always not have that RF front end and not that part turned on. So, and you can then save some power.
That's right. No, you're right. You're right on all counts. But yes, for certain markets,
and
for
Japan,
that one
right, too, has a lot of millimeter wave.
Yeah, there's some areas that are percolating up, but you're right. In the United States, it's really where the hotbed for millimeter wave is. So yeah, that shows our commitment not just to the technology, but also regionally, the markets that we want to serve.
Fantastic. Let's jump into Wi-Fi 7 a little bit. I mean, you and I have covered this extensively on previous shows, but you have a demo here, which kind of blew my mind. I was seeing 14 gigabit speeds. I was seeing on the kind of lesser 2 antenna implementation up to about 5.5 gigabits. And, this is the first time we've really seen Wi-Fi 7 kind of shown. I mean, these are, for the audience, I'll put up a photo maybe for the video version of this. It's just like, it's still like prototype, like not prototype, but like
not with nice plastics.
It's not retail, right? It does have the kind of long antenna sticking out, but I was talking to your team and they're basically like hinted that CS might be where we see this stuff in consumer products. And so that's kind of pretty exciting to me.
Yeah, it's happening really, really quickly. So just to give your users a little bit about what you saw is that what we are demonstrating is for the first time wireless, about 14 gigabit backhaul.
Right.
Using MLO technology,
Right.
which we previously covered, which is bonding of channels. Wi-Fi is, taking the page out of, cellular. And then the second demo we got is a laptop with a embedded, client version of Wi-Fi 7 talking to an access point. And the speed's about 5 gigabit per second,
Right.
like you say. So these are real speeds over the air. So at CES, we're going to demonstrate, Wi-Fi 7 in actual end products.
Okay.
So a few phones, a few notebooks, and maybe some other devices. So like the end product on the client side, talking wirelessly, using Wi-Fi 7, of course, to access points and even a few repeaters. So really an end-to-end over-the-air Wi-Fi demo with actual products that are either on the market or soon to be on the market. So that's really the exciting part.
That's very cool. I'm looking forward to it, honestly. I mean, to me, the way I look at this is, right now, a lot of us who need to just be on the internet can do it with Wi-Fi 6 or 6E and be perfectly happy for most purposes, right? It's like we're using Wi-Fi as a way to get online. But if you start doing transfers of data between devices in your home, say, you edit video and you maybe right now it's all like you have a desktop computer or a laptop connected via Ethernet, maybe to a NAS. And you really kind of need like a baseline of maybe gigabit or 2 gigabit or 10 gigabit if you have 10 gigabit on your devices. Yeah. 10 gigabit is probably rare these days for most, even for us creators. But say you have a 1 gigabit network, right? Like it's going to be pretty reliable over Ethernet. So now you can actually substitute Wi-Fi 7 for that. And that opens up a whole bunch of possibilities. That means that you can have a NAS in your office. That's your storage server for your video editing. And you can be with your Mac or whatever PC in the other room,
wherever you want to be,
seamlessly editing. And that's a game changer. Yes. Because it's not the 12 or 13 or 14 gigabits that are impressive to me. It's the fact that if I can get that fast, it means I can sustain probably 9 gigabit if I need to.
You got it.
Like without having to worry about anything.
You got it. That's what we're trying to get to, right? We want to unwire gigabit Ethernet. What used to be wired gigabit Ethernet connections to be wireless. And I think Wi-Fi 7 is probably the first wireless technology or Wi-Fi technology to really arrive that can do this, right? Never before. So it'll be interesting, stop on by, show the demo, and we'll have some other stuff to show as well, but definitely come on by. It'll be a good time.
So do you think that we're going to start seeing products very like with the T800 in the next year or so that will obviously also integrate Wi-Fi 7? So could I potentially, let's imagine a year or two from now, walk into T-Mobile store and get a CPE, a box for home internet that has the latest T800 in it and has a Wi-Fi 7 modem chip of yours that is essentially a state-of-the-art home internet solution.
I would say what we're really shooting for is, because you talk about the marriage of Wi-Fi 7 and the T800 series, right? For example, in the home, I think probably, year or two, the way that we're going right now, I wouldn't be surprised. Certainly, we're going to try to make it happen as fast as we can. We really believe in 5G for the masses, for broadband, because like I showed, at the summit here, there's still about quarter or so of American households who don't have broadband, and that
was amazing. And not even that, like for those of us who do have broadband, like in my place in San Francisco, you'd think San Francisco, the tech mecca, we've had broadband internet for years. You'd think almost anybody could get fiber. That is not the case.
Yes.
I don't live in a particularly odd neighborhood, but I cannot get fiber where I am. I can get very, very decent cable, but it's not remotely close to gigabit.
Exactly.
And it's interesting because I think you and I talked about this in a previous episode, but I tried the T-Mobile solution, that's the MediaTek solution, for a few weeks this past summer, and I was getting a consistent 600 megabits on just by the window.
Yeah.
And, it not only was it, so really effectively maybe 400 megabits, but it was amazing because it was so reliable. That's the thing that really like kind of got me on board, because I was in my head, I'm thinking I put my phone by a window when I'm at a hotel and I got hotspot and it's workable, but it's not the most, it's inconsistent. There's slowdowns, there's speed ups, it's a little all over the place. And now it's not a dedicated device, but at the same time, I'm thinking to myself, like, there's got to be more going on. And you and I talked about this.
Yes.
The carriers are working to kind of allocate, like they're making these connections more stable on purpose. And I think that really pays off, because I was really impressed. Like I could have totally lived with it. The only kind of limiting factor for me was the upload. It wasn't quite as good as the cable. I'm actually, ironically, my current connection with cable is lower on the download than the T-Mobile was, but it's higher on the upload.
Yeah.
So it by a little bit, but
But it shows you how far we've come in 5G, right? It's just miles and miles, and it's only going to get better. And so that's why we're so gung-ho about this. And the future is very bright for 5G and all these applications we talked about. And then you layer in Wi-Fi 7.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I think is going to be really awesome, is because, the reality is this, right? Like, my audience is going to go buy a router, right? And, probably get a fiber connection if they can. And they're just going to be happy with that and going to manage their own network. But the reality is most people, right? The same people who buy TVs with your chipset and Alexas with your chipset, or rather Echoes or whatever, are just buying these products and they just want it to work.
Yes.
And so if they get a CPE from a carrier, put it in, get 5G at home, internet, and now they have Wi-Fi 7 on that. This is the most important device in the chain, right? For them, this is what needs to be future-proof for a few years.
That's right.
So if they start out with a system that has Wi-Fi 7, is going to, even if all their devices are Wi-Fi 6, not even 6E at first, eventually somebody's going to buy a phone in the house that has Wi-Fi 7 or a laptop or whatever it might be, Chromebook,
And the 7 is a more lucky number than 6. Add that to the note. Check.
So good, James. Well, guys, I think we should end on that note. That's kind of perfect. Well, thanks so much for the overview on T800, all the new 5G stuff and the Wi-Fi 7 demo and stuff. Folks, stay tuned. We'll have the rest of the show with my guests. We're going to talk about the news and reviews of the week. So I hope you enjoyed this segment. Thanks, James, so much for being my guest.
Thank you, as always. Always nice to be on your show.
And stay tuned for more, folks. It's November 24th today, and I have Don Preston on for the rest of the show, folks. And we're going to talk about the news of the week and a bunch of devices that were announced. Hey, Dom, how are you?
I'm really good, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm pretty great. So that MediaTek stuff was pretty interesting, eh?
Yeah, I mean, any excuse to spend 10 or 15 minutes deep diving into chips, I'm there.
I figured you would be. So, so let's talk about some of the phones this week, because it's been a busy week. Like, we're back to kind of like this, the TikTok cycle in a way, because I feel like, we've had that crazy Techtober, November that we always have, right? But then, then we jump into that weird period of time after Qualcomm announces their chip, where all the Chinese phone makers are trying to compete with who's going to come out with the next phone before everyone else, right?
What used to be a nice, quiet Christmas lull and is now this like frantic mess of Chinese OEMs trying to one-up each other and be the first to market with this chip and that feature. And it's a bit of an onslaught, especially this week when it's Black Friday as well. So I've been very busy doing that side of the job. And then all of a sudden you've got 3 major phone announcements over 3 days.
For sure, yeah. So, that's kind of what happened this week is, I mean, we didn't all get Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 phones. We did get one, but nonetheless a pretty significant one. And we did get a bunch of other phones from China, or at least, some of them are global, but mostly, we can tell this is a China-driven thing. So I wanted to go through those. And then, of course, there's some pretty interesting leaks and rumors. Usually I'm not huge on leaks and rumors, but this week I was like, I need to touch on these. So, and I think you'll find them pretty interesting too, you folks listening right now. So let's start with the first phone, which I think is really exciting because I've always been a big fan. It's the Vivo X series, specifically the X90 Pro Plus, which is the first Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 2 phone. You know what? I did not expect that Vivo would be the first. Did you?
I didn't, before the summit, and then I'd been going around quietly telling people, I think Vivo might be the first ones with this chip.
So you knew, okay.
Because I did basically, Vivo confirmed they were going to be the first with the Dimensity 9200, so we knew that. And then no one had that video at the Snapdragon Summit saying that they were going to be the first with the Qualcomm chip. And I thought the only reason no one's saying it is because the one company that could say it has already said the same thing about MediaTek, and they can't do both. And lo and behold, here we are, and Vivo managed to get both chips out the gate before anyone else. So yeah, I'm feeling a little smug this week.
That's pretty surprising, though. I don't ever remember Vivo being so gung-ho about hitting the chips soon and there like that, especially on both sides, like both Qualcomm and MediaTek. And usually it's Xiaomi, right? Especially on Qualcomm's side, it's Xiaomi.
Yeah, I think it was maybe Motorola last year, but before that, always Xiaomi, and Xiaomi were one of the first last year still. They are the traditional first one out of the gate with the new Snapdragon chip. So I'm surprised we haven't heard more from them yet, but I guess that's coming soon.
I think there's rumors of the December 1st launch of the Xiaomi 13. Yeah. So I feel like that's going to happen. I wouldn't put it past them. I mean, they don't want to delay much longer. And I wouldn't be surprised if we get a Moto phone as well sometime really soon.
But I think they've already, Motorola have already teased some HN2 benchmarks on Weibo. Ooh. So they're kind of beginning to hint at something coming. But yeah.
That's kind of hilarious, honestly. Like, come on, guys!
Like, just dropped an Antutu score, and
that's just such a nerd thing to do. Oh man! So what's your take on the X90 Pro Plus? I mean, I'm a huge fan of the X series from Vivo because photography is a big part of what I love to do with my phones, and the Vivos have always been like since the X50 Pro, which is when I started kind of my journey with the flagships from Vivo. It's been just phenomenal all the way around. I have the X80 Pro Plus. Is that a thing? Yeah.
There wasn't a Plus of the X80.
That was a Pro.
It was just the Pro.
So I have that one, and it's fantastic. And this looks like a beast. We got the IMX989 on there, the 1-inch sensor that debuted on Xiaomi's 12S Ultra, which had an exclusive on, I guess, for 6 months or something.
Yeah, it must have been a timed exclusive, but now we're beginning to see that roll out a little bit elsewhere. I mean, I'm with you. I'm super excited. I have kind of a similar journey with Vivo. I started with the X50 Pro or Pro Plus, I guess, and have reviewed most of their flagships ever since then, and have been singing their praises for a long time, and always feeling like I was there, quite being like, come on, these cameras are amazing, and a lot of people, it's hard to break through the noise of Pixel is the best or whatever top tier Galaxy flagship is the best that year. But I think the last couple of years, it's been hard to argue that Vivo's at least in the conversation about the best camera in any phone. I love the X80 Pro as well. For me, going to the Snapdragon Summit in Hawaii, I sort of thought, well, I want to take the phone with the best camera to have with me for that trip. And it was the X80 Pro that I grabbed. That was the one I thought, I want that with me while I'm there for a week or two. So I'm very ready for the next step up from here.
Yeah, for me, it's always one of the top 5 camera phones of the year. Like, there's always Samsung, Apple, and Google, of course. Mm-hmm. And then it's always, Xiaomi with the Ultra lately, or the X series from Vivo. There's also Huawei with the P series are still really incredibly good, even though it's a little harder for me to justify because I live in Google land. But for some people it might work. You're based, of course, in the UK. So, like, is it sold, the X series from Vivo there? Is it officially available?
Sometimes they're sporadic. The X80 Pro is, I think, one of the 70s, but then they missed the 60 gen. So I think they're trying to do one phone in the UK and Europe every year now in the flagship series. But say, there's obviously in this Chinese launch, there's an X90, an X90 Pro, and an X90 Pro Plus. I would guess one of them will come to Europe. Probably the standard Pro would be my guess. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I'm kind of hoping to get my hands on the Pro Plus. I mean, I'm sure Vivo will hook me up. They're generally pretty good, even if it's just a China-only phone, because, man, that thing is a beast. Did you see the specs on that thing? The camera system is just blowing my mind. Let's go through that real quick. I mean, also IMX989 of kind of the star of the show here, but they paired it with a faster lens than Xiaomi did, which is really interesting.
Yeah, that surprised me. That's I'm going to be really curious to see how that compares to the Xiaomi.
Yeah, I'm not sure how they managed to do that, honestly. That's quite the lens. F over 1.75 versus F over 1.9. And then, of course, it looks like a glass lens with T-Star coating, Leica's help here. And that's been a big deal because low light photography on the X series, I think on the main sensor is the best of anything, in my opinion.
Yeah, especially for the dynamic range they managed to do at low light. The way it handles light sources in low light shots and things like that is
so I think that's where we're going to see a continuation of what we saw there. Mm-hmm. Then we are getting a 64 megapixel telephoto, and it's got a 3.5x optical zoom. Is it a folded lens? Do we know, or is it a regular lens?
Oh, I'm not sure, actually. I didn't manage to pick that detail out of the announcement.
I mean, either way, we're getting a single telephoto here that is definitely an improvement over the typical little 8 megapixel telephotos they've been putting on the X series.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Even if you like the two telephotos do feel like the telephoto and the portrait lens, as they like to call it.
Right.
That in a way almost feels like a bigger jump than the IMX989, just on a pure specs basis. Like the resolution jump they've gone up in here, the lens speed, kind of things like that. There's big changes in the telephoto system.
Yeah, you now could technically get 7x zoom by picking the 16 megapixel center of the sensor.
Exactly.
So that's a pretty big native zoom. And then the other thing is, I love their portrait lens every time. It's interesting though that it's fixed focus. I'm wondering if that's a typo. That seems odd that they would put effort into a 50 megapixel sensor, portrait lens, but not put autofocus on it, but then still have OIS on it, because apparently all three of those cameras have OIS. So I think that's a typo. There's no way that's a fixed focus lens.
I had the same thought. I don't understand that. If they have done that, it doesn't make sense to me. But yeah, especially with throwing the OIS on it, it's not having
all I can think of is that they might have done it on purpose to force you to do portraits. And because potentially with a 50 megapixel sensor, the depth of field is so shallow on this fixed focus lens that you will kind of in the viewfinder see, pick the right distance, because maybe they'll even help you with some, the focus highlights or whatever. That would be really cool, actually, that you do the manual focus in a way by like they kind of force you to get it, to nail it basically. And you can decide which plane you want, the nose, the mouth, the eyes, the ears, right? I mean, we're nerding out here because you and I are both camera nerds, but it's kind of intriguing to me if it's fixed focus, but I would prefer autofocus just simply because most people are not going to be able to handle that. Right?
No, I mean, it like the way you describe it there, it could be a fun limitation to work around, but most people don't want limitations to work around in their phone, right? They want it to just do the things they expect it to do and
100%.
Get autofocus.
Yeah. And then, of course, we have an ultra wide, 114 degree field of view. That's okay. 48 megapixel, Yeah,
I think this is either the same ultra wide as the X80 Pro or very similar. On paper, I can't pull them apart.
Yeah.
So I don't think they've changed a lot there.
Yeah, and then of course a 32 megapixel selfie cam, but because it's in a punch hole or hole punch, it's f over 2.45 like always, and that's not a very fast lens. I would much rather see them do an f over 1.8, 12 megapixel, 1.2 micron pixels with autofocus and OIS on the front camera. Like, remember when HTC put OIS on their front face camera? Like how much of a game changer that was? You could literally selfie vlog by like just walking around the street.
I think Vivo did it for one phone as well. I think one of the V21 maybe. Suddenly they've always had that selfie camera focus on that series, and I'm pretty sure one of them had OIS on the front lens, and I remember thinking it was incredible. And then they dropped it from the next generation, and I was always like, why have you taken that away? That was an excellent introduction.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of having autofocus at least, and maybe even some sort of stabilization that isn't digital on the front lens, but nobody seems to be caring. It's so unfortunate. But at the same time, folding phones are going to kind of solve that in a way, I think, by letting you use the rear cameras to take photos of yourself, which is always going to be better anyway.
That's true.
But what else stood out for you? I mean, obviously Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, there's tons of RAM and storage, there's wireless and wired charging at high speed, 80 watt and 50 watt respectively. That doesn't seem like huge, but honestly, anything above 66 watts, I'm happy.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the oddities in this range that actually, if you drop down to the other two phones, they have faster
charging. What is it, 120
watts?
Yeah.
But I'm with you. I think 80 or above, it doesn't make that much of a difference at that point. It's very fast. You're not going to
So you know
notice.
what's interesting to me about this phone, though, is that they have their own Vivo V2 ISP, right? The next generation of the ISP they had on the X80. And after all the ISP improvements we were drilled into our heads at Qualcomm's Snapdragon Summit last week, I feel like why are they completely not using that now? Like, how do you feel about that? Like, Qualcomm must be feeling a little weird about this one being the first, right?
Yeah, it's a weird one for Qualcomm because they obviously don't get any of their big camera enhancements shown off on stage or anything like that. I remember talking to someone at Qualcomm at Summit about this in a roundtable or something, or someone asked how they feel about how many OEMs just going to throw their own ISP in any way. I think it was Judd Heap, Qualcomm's camera guy. And yeah, they clearly have mixed feelings about that and see it as a challenge, I guess, that they need to up their own game to make OEMs feel like they don't need to throw in their own ISPs and add their own stuff on top. I think it's tricky, if nothing else, as a consumer, right? You look at this and you don't even know if you're paying attention to what Qualcomm are announcing, you don't know what that stuff you're going to get in one of these phones now, which things Vivo has done for themselves. And unless you're really willing to start following every announcement live stream and digging deep into V2 ISP spec sheets, like, how can you tell?
I agree. Most people are not going to notice or care, but we're going to care because we know, we know what Mary Silicon X did for the Oppo Find X5 Pro, and we know what that V1 whatever chip did for the X80, and we're paying attention to that. And honestly, more and more, I feel like this is proof that if Google really wanted to, they could make a Snapdragon-equipped Pixel with their own Tensor ISP or Tensor NPU only. Kind of, that would be my ideal scenario, or even a Dimensity 9200, because I still feel that they're being held back by the Exynos architecture to some extent, right? Like, I understand now they're really in bed with Samsung because it's the whole thing now. There's not even an IMX sensor, like they used to be on the telephoto on the 7 Pro. Right? It's all Samsung sensors on the Pixel, and it's all Samsung display, and it's all Samsung processor and probably memory chips and everything else. Good for them, but I kind of still feel that we would all have a better Pixel experience, especially in battery life and thermal performance, if we had some sort of MediaTek or Qualcomm chip in there, assisted by a Tensor chip. NPU from Google, right?
Well, I mean, even Samsung would probably admit that off the record, in that they're moving so far away from Exynos on their own phones, right? We now know Qualcomm has a pretty much exclusive S23, provision of chips. So, yeah, it's clearly the thing holding the Tensor back from at least a kind of core performance and battery life side. But
for sure,
it's hard to see that changing anytime in the next year or two.
100%. And in terms of display, of course, you're getting a 1440 pixel display with LTPO4. It's like definitely top of the line display. 1800 nits peak, which is going to be amazing in California. And honestly, I love the industrial design of this phone with that little bar at the bottom. They're kind of growing into it, their design language. It's evolved.
I like the bar a lot. I also like that they have tidied up the camera module, because one of my big pet peeves about the X80 Pro is it's
a little much.
That same big circular camera, but then for some reason the periscope sits outside it, just below it, as this some extra bit. And they've actually now built all of it into the one big ring, which makes a lot more sense. And it's a much cleaner design on the back now. I do wish that both versions weren't leather finish. I'm not a huge fan of the faux leather finish on the rear of the phone. And I
can
think
live with
both
it.
The red and black one here are leather, which I don't hate it, but I don't love it.
Would you want a ceramic back instead?
Oh, I'd love a ceramic back.
Mm-hmm.
Or even just the kind of matte, kind of slightly frosted AG glass that they do on the X80 Pro or something, you know.
And then do we know pricing yet on these? I'm trying to figure that out right now.
They did announce pricing for China.
6,999
for the top spec.
One. Yeah.
Yeah. 6,500 for the cheaper spec. So I think that's about $900.
Yeah, $1,000 roughly. Yeah. That's actually a pretty competitive price because that's a China only price. You know that if it comes to the West, it'll be $1,200. Exactly. And honestly, it deserves it. It has everything but the kitchen sink. I mean, like this is what I love about BBK Group, and I kind of including Vivo in this here, of course. Is that they just don't mess about. Like when they go premium, they go premium. They don't care how much it costs. Whereas I kind of always feel like Samsung has to be mindful of the fact that their flagship is so popular in the West that they have to come out with a price that's reasonable for the West. Whereas in China, they're like, whatever. It's like the Xiaomi 12S Ultra. It's like, $1,500? We don't care. Yeah, go nuts, I mean, I kind of love that. I feel like, I'm sorry, but there is room for ultra premium phones. I don't care what people say. Like, and I want that. And at that point, like, that's where I expect no limits. Like, put everything you can in there. Just give me the whole shebang. So,
and I'd rather, if brands know there's a space for ultra premium models, that they're putting that effort into throwing better specs into those phones, rather than just sort of what we used to get more of, which is extra blingy designs and Porsche partnerships or whatever that bump the price up for the top tier model,
Hello there, Huawei. Yeah, I know. Although the Porsche design phones have been pretty interesting. I mean, overpriced, but pretty interesting.
I don't dislike them, but I'd rather have all that effort get put into making the camera even better and that kind of thing. And like you said, this is a spec sheet where you look at and it's almost difficult to see where you could even improve things. I guess you could turn the 12 gig of RAM into 16. You could do a terabyte storage model. Other than that, there's just not a lot of room above this right now.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting to me. Like, I'd love to hear your take on this because it feels to me like Vivo is even more premium than Oppo now. Like, I just feel like BBK Group has this identity crisis going on right now. More than ever. I mean, Oppo is always kind of being pretty awesome in my opinion, but then there's this blurring happening now with Realme and OnePlus where they're all kind of, identical rebranded part spin phones from these pretty exciting part spin, to be honest. I mean, I'm not going to say no to an IMX 766 with OIS on a $300 phone like the Realme 9 Pro Plus, for example. That was pretty dope. But my point is, it's like, I feel like I get all these phones, right? And I feel like I'm like, somebody's messing with my brain here. These are all variations of the same thing. And you get that with Xiaomi and Redmi and Poco as well. But I feel that the only one really standing out is in that entire BBK group is Vivo with, of course, EQ or whatever you want to call that as a kind of a spin-off. It just seems like they're doing a better job. And also, they're not really under the Oppo, part spin. Like, there's a little bit like the displays and some things are clearly like shared, but they seem to be creating their own universe a little more. And I really like that.
Well, they still have their own R&D pipeline, which the other, the Oppo, Realme, OnePlus family all share one R&D set, which is Oppo's. Vivo still has its own R&D, so I'm sure there's some bits that get shared with the rest of BBK, but they do have their own, as you say, their own route that they're finding their stuff. But you're totally right. I mean, if you look at, say, the Oppo Find X5 Pro, the one from February this year, it's a great phone. I really like that phone. It doesn't have that feeling that this Vivo has, where every single part of the phone is the top of the line. If anything, my take on that phone at the time was this is a kind of premium all-rounder. It wasn't the best around at any given thing, but it did everything pretty well for a flagship. But there was, you could always take any of those individual cameras or whatever and say, oh, well, there's some phone out there that does that better. You look at the Vivo X90 Pro Plus, and it's much harder to find those spots where you say, oh, this is the weakness of this phone. Someone else does that better than this Vivo does. I think Oppo is, a bit less inclined to chase that absolute top spec model.
Like, I kind of felt there was a time when it was a bit blurry, like around the time of the X50 Pro, and the Oppo Find X2 Pro. Remember that Find X2 Pro with that folded lens? It was really kind of like, it was really premium and really kind of moving in that direction where Vivo was moving, and then it stopped. Like, don't get me wrong, the Find X3 Pro was a really great phone, and I love the ceramic back and the way it was one piece, and like, it's very premium and luxurious. But you look at the spec sheet, and that's where you could see they were starting to hold back, right? A 2x telephoto with no OIS, like, who does that? And then they repeated that on the Find X5 Pro, and it doesn't leave me very confident about the Find X6 Pro, which we have some, rumors we're going to talk about later. But it's like, I don't know. I kind of feel like Vivo is the most premium that BBK Group has to offer. But I'm also worried in the back of my head that they're going to merge them into each other at some point. That Oppo is going to become the parent, because, that's kind of where Pete Lau seems to be going with everything. I kind of feel like he's ruined OnePlus, to some extent. Like, I'm exaggerating a little bit because, OnePlus still produces geographically meaningful phones, especially here in the US, but it's not at the high end. Like the OnePlus 10 Pro and the 10T are good phones for the money, but they don't really kind of break into this Apple-Samsung dichotomy that we have here in North America, because they're not the best value and not the best bang for your buck in a way, even though I like a lot about these phones. But if you look at the N series we have here, the Nord N, which is N for North America, for the kind of prices you expect at the budget mid-range level for prepaid in North America, they're killing it. In fact, they're, I think, kind of stealing Moto's lunch in many ways.
Oh, for sure.
You know? And is that what I want from OnePlus? Not really myself, but at the same time, I admire that they're able to use their might and flex their muscle of part spinning to give us phones that are very competitive in this market, like they do in India, and like they do with the CEs, which are Communauté Européenne. I like to call them the European Nords that are not the pure Nords, because it's complicated. Now you have the pure Nords, and then you have the Nord CE, and then you have the Nord N. Oh man, this is what I'm talking about. He's completely diluted the brand, and then he's not able, and I mean Pete Lau, not able to make a flagship that's really worth it. It's no better than what Oppo's doing, and I feel that especially the OnePlus brand is kind of the Oppo brand for North America in some ways. Like, I mean, it's obviously exists in India and in China and in Europe too, but I feel like Oppo and Realme have a better footing in those markets, and I want them to take OnePlus and really give us the kind of phones we want here. I'll give you an example. Give us a flagship that only has 2 lenses in the back. If you want to make a premium mid-ranger, give us a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 with that 989, right? As a main sensor, and then give us a 766 as an ultra-wide like you did on the OnePlus 9 Pro, and then make that the phone. And then don't give us the telephoto, but don't give us some 2-megapixel sticker cam. Like, just make a phone for what this market expects. When they see an iPhone, they see 2 lenses on the base iPhone. When they see, the base 14. When you see a Samsung Galaxy that doesn't have a telephoto, well, it doesn't have an extra 2-megapixel whatever sensor. Like, that's my point. Like, give us, like, I kind of think nothing nailed it. If you remove all the glyph and all the gimmicks, they made this super balanced mid-ranger that hits all the right spots at an incredible price. Bring the price up a bit, put a Snapdragon 8 series in there or Dimensity 9000 series in there, and come out of, hit it out the park for this market. But I think that they are so driven by what the carriers want that it's never going to happen. But they have an opportunity that they're missing out on. And when I see what Vivo can do, I'm like, man, OnePlus could do so much better. So I don't know. How is it for you guys in the UK?
I mean, it's definitely different with OnePlus here. You listed the mess of phones that are out here where we've got the Nord and the Nord CE, and then we do get some of the N-numbered variants that come out in the US, but a different set of them. And, even if you just are looking at the cheaper phones, there's a huge range of them to pick from. I do think, you mentioned the Nothing phone as a point of reference, right? But say the OnePlus Nord 2T is this pretty similar phone to the Nothing in a lot of specs.
Correct.
And I think they did a really good job with the 2T. And I really like that phone. And as you were going through it, I was just thinking, yeah, like you said with Nothing, if they could take the Nord 2T and just up the chipset, upgrade one of the camera lenses, you'd have an amazing phone that could sit at 100 or 200 euros more expensive than it currently is. And I think do really, really well. And the problem they have now, especially with their current flagship strategy, is they do just have this gulf where they've got great phones that go up for a few hundred, and then go straight up to these top tier flagships that they're doing where they're not the best at that. And they've completely lost the whole segment they made their name in, which is the flagship killer or, affordable premium or whatever you want to call it. And that was exactly what made OnePlus what it is. And weirdly, now if you look at their lineup, it's the only bit of the market they're ignoring, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I feel the same. And I've always loved the real Nord, as I like to call it, Nord 2, Nord 2T. But it's like, it's unobtainium in this market, like it's probably easier to import a Nothing Phone 1 at this point than it is to import a Nord 2T. And I have had all the real Nords, except for the 2T. I've got the regular and the 2, and I love them.
They're great.
But it's like, there is very little room in this market for mid-range, even though, these phones on paper are fantastic. It's such a dichotomy between like budget phones here, or like whatever you want to call them, like $200 phones, and then the flagships, that the carriers are basically just, giving you a flagship for free as part of some kind of deal, and you go with that. And then trade-in deals make that also difficult, that $500 mid-range chipset phone like the Nord 2T. So I think for North America, I'd rather do what you suggested. Take the Nord 2T, add an 8 Gen 2 to it, just keep everything the same. And now you have a phone that clearly is going to be competitive, but also is going to be probably a little more affordable than a Samsung or iPhone. And you can probably get the carriers on board in North America, but somehow they're not going in that direction at all. They still want to make a premium flagship. We're going to talk about the rumors on that as well. And that's great. I'm on board, but like it has to be at least as good as an S22 Ultra if you're going to go that route. Like to me,
exactly.
That's like for this market, if you want to sell a OnePlus 11 of any kind, especially 11 Pro, we start needing to go up there to, Find X6 Pro, Vivo X series levels of quality and performance and spec, and keep it at $1,000. And I'm not sure they're going there. I'm not sure they're interested in doing that at all, actually, So I don't know. It's a little disappointing to see. I kind of always thought that Xiaomi's strategy with Redmi and Poco kind of worked, because different geographical area gets slightly different versions of the part spin, and everybody seems pretty happy. And then they still keep Xiaomi, the main brand, as the real top of the line.
Yeah.
But it's so much more blurred with BBK. And then there's confusion because of this whole Vivo universe of theirs, which is phenomenal. Please don't change it. But at the same time, I'm like, where's your brand identity, BBK Group? Like, it seems like basically Oppo and then Vivo. And then honestly, if I had to pick one of my favorite brands about all this, it's Realme, because like they're the new OnePlus,
Yeah.
They make such great phones for the money.
What's the strange thing with the Oppo, OnePlus, Realme structure is at the time they brought OnePlus fully back into the fold, everyone said, well, maybe they're going to do Realme for the cheap phones, OnePlus for the kind of mid-tier, Oppo for the flagships, and have this structure that aligns those brands in those spaces. And that would make some sense if you kind of just went down them like that. And that's a little bit like what Xiaomi does with kind of, you could almost line up Xiaomi, Poco, Redmi in that kind of ranking as well. But they're just not doing it. OnePlus and Oppo are duking it out with each other at the super premium end for no obvious reason. And then OnePlus is also competing with Realme at the cheap end in markets outside the US. And then the only phones they've got in that upper mid-range, which we'll talk about later, are the Reno 9, the Reno series, and then they don't even release them everywhere anyway. So they're whole structure's confusing to me.
Let's actually jump into the Reno 9. I've got the Honor Magic foldable phone here. We'll talk about that as well. But since we're talking BBK Group,
we might as well roll on.
So the Reno 9 has been announced. Finally, we've got some specs here. I think it's China only for now.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm expecting one of them to come out as a global phone. I think the 8. It's funny that the 8 Pro, the Reno 8 Pro just came out as a global phone. Like, what was it? 3 months ago or something?
Yeah, not long.
I have one. It's great. I love it. But the only thing that bummed me out on the 8 Pro was that it didn't have OIS on that IMX766. But everything else about it, I really loved. I thought it was a really beautiful phone. I don't understand how Vivo with the X series and Oppo with the Reno particularly is able to literally come out with a new phone line every 3 months. It's like, we got the 7 earlier this year, and then the 8, and then we're getting the 9, and that's 2022, guys. Like, how do you do this?
It is strange. They were on 6-month cycles, and then those 6 months just seem to keep contracting and becoming 4 or 5 months, and everything's smushing together. I mean, it gets thrown off because you get the Chinese launch, and then the global launch comes 2 or 3 months after that, and you begin to lose sense of which one's launched when and where. But the pace is a little alarming for sure.
So it looks like both phones have a 6.7-inch display, which, AMOLED 120 hertz, you expect that at that price point. I'm kind of glad that Oppo's gone back to making these phones a little more premium looking and feeling. Because for a while there, they were a little plasticky. They looked cool, but they were a little off, in my opinion. But hopefully these are continuing in that direction.
I mean, these look a lot like the 8 series, so I'm kind of reassured in that. Yeah.
Right. And so we're getting a 778G Snapdragon chip on the 9 and an 8100 Dimensity chip on the Dimensity Max, 8100 Max on the Pro with MediaSilicon X. So that's actually an upgrade because the original had MediaSilicon non-X, the 8 Pro.
Oh, you might be right. Yeah, I can't remember exactly.
I didn't know this, but that had been pointed out to me by, I think it was Hadley, over at Android Authority. He took me aside. He said, it's actually a slightly different MediaSilicon on the Reno 8 Pro. I was like, really? I thought it was the same. He's like, no, there's no X. I'm like, oh, so I guess this is the X now. And we get lots of storage and RAM, which is, these phones are kind of premium mid-rangers, so that makes sense.
There's also the Pro Plus model, which sits at the top, and that has a 8 Plus Gen 1.
Oh, okay. I missed that one somehow. Okay, 8 Plus Gen 1. That's actually pretty good because that's a great chip.
I'm kind of surprised they've gone that powerful even for the Pro Plus model. It's a very
so for the 999 Pro, we have a 64 megapixel main and a 50 megapixel main. No word of OIS on these. Do you know about the 9 Pro Plus, what it packs? I don't have that in front of me.
Also a 50 megapixel main. I'm guessing it's the same as the Pro, but I'm not sure. This one does have OIS though.
Yeah, it's probably stabilized because there's a plus. It's a plus model. That's the one to get, folks. Honestly, I mean, interesting because that's almost stepping on the Oppo Find X5 Pro. Think about it. That's going to be a better phone than the Find X5 Pro because of the Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1.
Yeah, it's got worse secondary lenses, but for the main lens,
whatever.
Yeah. For your main camera, it's going to be really great.
I mean, honestly, other than the ultra wide that was really nice on the Find X5 Pro, the telephoto was...
That's true, yeah.
It was helped by the MediaSilicon X and the ability to fuse data, right? So it take data from the main sensor and the telephoto to improve it. But I'm on board. These look nice. The design is a little bit less... looks a little bit less premium than last time, though. Doesn't quite have that camera bump. It doesn't look like it's raised as much, which I thought was cool.
I had the same thought. It looks a lot, probably purposefully more svelte, more sleek, but it does lose something maybe a little in not being as prominent.
Yeah, and a 4,500 milliamp hour battery with 67 watt. What's the Pro Plus do for power?
4,700, so a little bigger battery and 80 watt wide charging.
Nice. Does it have the same display as the other two?
Ooh, good question. I actually think...
different size, maybe?
It's a 6.7 AMOLED, but it's curved on the Pro Plus.
Oh, it's curved on. And the other ones have slab-sided phones. Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, well, there you go, folks. We had to go over that real quick. So now let's jump into the Honor as well, because I want to spend a bit more time talking about the rumors. And so the Honor folding phone was coming. We know this. And the big exciting news here is that it's going to be available as a global model. So this is the first time you're going to be able to buy a folding phone from somebody else than Samsung. I don't know. Did the Xiaomi Mix Fold 2 make it to the UK?
No,
it didn't, right?
No.
Okay.
The Xiaomi and the Oppo haven't. We get the Huawei ones.
You get
that's
the
the
Huawei
other competition
ones.
we get, but
But they're not Google enabled. So basically,
exactly.
Until now, you haven't really been able to get a folding phone in a tablet form factor that was anything but a Samsung in the UK. And for us, of course, we're not even getting
absolutely not
this honor. But the point is now we can at least import it to get maybe some 5G support and some Google support, which I think is big news. So that's what's got me excited about it, folks. Like finally we get a phone here that I like the original. I saw it at MWC. I played with it. I thought it was really solid. And this looks like just an evolution of that, but it's coming to Europe. So you must be excited. This is big news for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think any competition for Samsung is good news because Samsung has done a lot of good stuff with its folds. But certainly when you look at the Fold 4, it's hard to deny they're kind of resting on their laurels a little bit. And I think it will be good for them to have competition in the global markets that they're in. And they've had a few years of not having to worry about that. So, even things like that, the hinge mechanism and the fact that this closes entirely flat. Obviously, we've seen that from other manufacturers before. Honor isn't the first, but Samsung still doesn't do that. And finally, there'll be another phone out in Europe and in a lot of global markets where you can look at them and say, well, the Samsung one looks a little janky now by comparison, at least from that specific hardware side.
So Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1, I was expecting a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, honestly, somehow, with this one.
I was a little surprised by that, especially because they waited until after Qualcomm's announcement. To launch a phone this premium without the new chip, I feel like they should have put it out a week before Qualcomm got there, just to avoid having that line of, well, it's kind of weird you didn't use the new one. There's all sorts of reasons it goes into this stuff, but yeah, I was expecting a Gen 2 to pop up.
7.9-inch 90 hertz internal display. That's pretty damn big. And then a 6.45 external 120 hertz display at 1080p. That's much brighter than the internal display, so that's good. If you're really in bright light, you can just use the outside screen for a little moment until you find some shade. Pretty smart. And not that the main screen is poor, 800 nits, but it's still,
Yeah, and I think it's telling of the way Honor are talking about this phone, right? That and the refresh rate, you said, but it's 120 hertz on the outer and 90 hertz on the inner. I think they're really pitching this as the outer screen as the main screen. This is a phone you use closed, and then it opens to a tablet when you want a tablet. But they're kind of pushing the closed experience first and foremost.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's pretty hot looking. I hope they make an orange one like they did last time. That was pretty dope. 54 megapixel main camera, 50 megapixel ultra wide, 8 megapixel telephoto with 3x optical. Respectable. Hopefully the cameras have OIS on something, because I've noticed that Honor I was really upset when the Magic 4 Pro did not have OIS on the main sensor. You had to go to the Ultimate, and I was like, come on, guys, seriously?
It was the big downside of that phone for me, maybe. Certainly one of the big... I can't see any mention of OIS here, but I don't know.
It was the same with, I kind of feel like, again, I had an entire conversation with the folks at Honor at IFA about this. We had a little gathering where they let us kind of like talk to them honestly about things. And, it's like, there's still not enough delineation between Honor and Huawei. And here's another example. The lack of OIS on this Magic 4 Pro earlier this year. A year and a half ago, the Mate 40 Pro came out without OIS on the main sensor, and then they had OIS on the Pro Plus. And I was just like, I gave them hell about it. And they were like, what is the big deal? And I'm like, this is not our P series. I'm like, did you see the price of the phone? Like these are table stakes at the flagship level. Like we can do just as well without. I'm like, first of all, you're lying, because you can always have faster shutter speeds with OIS. Secondly, like, again, look at the price point of the Mate 40. It's a fantastic phone, but the Pro should have OIS. And I don't know about the 50 this year. I didn't look at the Mate 50 Pro to see if they didn't put OIS on the main sensor, because I just haven't followed. They're on Optanium, even as media person, I'm having a hard time. I managed to get a P50 Pro like 3-4 months after they announced it or something. And it's a great phone. The imaging on that phone is unbelievably good. But it's a non-ish. It's a non-starter, right? Like you just can't,
of course.
So anyway, so this is I'm hoping they didn't mess this up, because they're only making one folding phone. There's no Pro Plus or anything here. Let's just give us the beans. So let's see if that's the case. 5,000 milliamp hour battery, which is 66 watt charging. No wireless charging, I presume, which is on bummer.
Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah.
The Chinese phones, they are slowly starting to understand how wireless charging is a thing, but not fast enough, in my opinion.
Well, you either don't get it, or you get 50-watt super fast wireless charging with a custom charger and an enormous coil, and it takes up half the phone's internal capacity or whatever.
For sure. But the pricing on this is very competitive, like about $1,050 on the Chinese model. How much do you think this is going to sell in UK pounds when it comes to your market?
Ooh.
1,200?
I was going to say 12 or 13, I think. Normally I'd look at that kind of yuan price and think 1,200-ish. I do feel like because it's a foldable, they might bump it up a little bit more and trust they can get away with, because that still leaves them several hundred of wiggle room between them and Samsung.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, that's all they have to do, right, is come in a bit cheaper than Samsung.
How much is a Fold 4 in the UK right now?
Oh, I want to say 1,600, maybe.
Oh, wow.
I'm not sure off the top of my head.
In pounds, huh?
I can find out, but it's certainly in that kind of space. They're expensive.
Yeah.
No, 1,450. I lied. 1,450.
Okay. Well, that's still a lot of money. Yeah, if they can come right below that, 1,300, that'd be great for sure.
Yeah.
So we talked about a lot of BBK Group stuff. Kind of managed to squeeze themselves in there. I'm very excited about this folding phone because Haya is going to be able to send me a review unit because she can justify sending me a global phone. So because I really pestered her about the V, Magic V, and now we have the VS. So I'm looking forward to it. But BBK Group. So we talked about the Reno 9 and how the 9 Pro Plus is almost stepping on the toes of the Find X5 Pro. Now, Find X5 Pro is old news now, but there's obviously rumors of a 6 Pro. And we're starting to seeing some leaks and stuff. What is your take on that? It looks like it might get that IMX989 as a main sensor. Hooray to that. That's exciting to me.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, funnily enough, one of the things I look at when I think about the Find X6 stuff is, in line with what we were talking about earlier, it feels a little bit like they are learning from what Vivo are doing. Because we've also heard rumors that across this line, we're going to see both the Dimensity 9200 and the 8 Gen 2 popping up in different models. Probably the same thing where the 8 Gen 2 will be in the Pro and the top tier one. And as you said, the adoption of the 1-inch 989 sensor. So
and
at least those two elements feel like they're... Yeah.
Absolutely. And OIS on a supposedly 2.7x zoom. That's a big improvement for them.
Mm-hmm. It's a huge jump. And they were so bullish last year that telephoto stuff, it wasn't what consumers wanted. It's not what matters. I'm glad they've recognized that.
I think they learned their lesson with the phones that came out this year, like nailing that. Yes, for sure. I'm curious to see if this IMX989 will be paired with a combination of OIS and sensor shift stabilization, because that's one of the things on the Find X5 Pro, at least the Snapdragon version, that was kind of bonkers. They had a combination of in-body stabilization. Very few people talked about that, but I felt that the stabilization on that phone, like for photography, was insanely good, and I want to see that again. So I'm not sure. This is such a large sensor that I'm just not sure they even have the room for that.
I don't quite know how you'd make it work, but I hope they do. Yeah.
Surprise us. That's the one thing that, I felt that the Find X5 Pro, it was in the details that it was really impressive. And the ceramic back and whatever. And I feel like if they can kind of wow us in that similar way, I'd be interested in that. Yeah. It's looking pretty hot. We don't know too much else for the folks. That's really all the news here is that, I 989. I'm very happy. I really love how Qualcomm even name dropped the 989 on stage last week at the summit as one of the targeted chips for the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. That's instantly, I knew at that point we're going to see a proliferation of it. And honestly, if I had to pick any sensor that I'd like to see proliferating, that's the one. Like,
for sure.
I just really love how in the BBK part spin, the 766 became such a baller of a sensor. It's kind of feels like the 586 back in the day, which ended up in everything. The fact that the 766 ended up in everything makes me just really happy because it's such a good sensor. Even if you don't have OIS, whatever, it's such a good sensor. And it's so well tuned now. There's so many phones with it in the BBK empire that you cannot go wrong with any phone with that sensor on any of their brands, basically, you know?
Well, that's, I guess, one of the perks of Oppo's part spinning and everything like that is they are going to get more practice with every component, right? They're going to get more experience tuning for each sensor that they try and use, and hopefully we'll see them pull even more out of the 989 than we have so far. I mean, straight out of the gate in the Xiaomi 12S Ultra, that sensor did some amazing stuff with that main camera, and that was pretty much phone one to use it. At the time, it felt like that sensor was the secret weapon that gave that phone a leg up over the Vivo, over the Pixel at the time for certain elements of the photography. So I'm very, very keen to see that roll out in more phones across more brands and see everyone rolling out this huge sensor, absolutely enormous, and see what people can do with it.
Yeah, and the more that sensor makes it in phones, the more the price is going to become reasonable. Exactly. And the more we're likely to see it on some Realme phone next year or something.
Exactly, yeah.
Like
€300 Realme with a 1-inch camera sensor.
Exactly. You just can't go wrong at that point, which is kind of what I feel so happy about. Yeah, so this is great news, honestly. There's also some OnePlus rumors floating around, and what do you make of that? Like, OnePlus 11, you wrote about it. I will put the link to your story in there. So tell us a little more about it.
I mean, we know a bit more about the OnePlus 11 than we do about the Find X6 series. The funny one we've got here is even just the naming stuff looks like it's changing. Everything we've heard seems to be that it will be the OnePlus 11, not the OnePlus 11 Pro, but that it will still only be one phone, and that phone will be a Pro-level OnePlus phone.
Interesting.
So it will be a successor to the 10 Pro, but without the Pro name, is what we're hearing from a lot of people.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I mean, I can see the one argument, which is that it was always a bit funny to have a OnePlus 10 Pro with no 10. Like the Pro version of what? It doesn't make any sense on some level. But on the other hand, if you're going to put it out without the Pro moniker and charge $1,000 and, the hit at that price point, especially people who know the brand a bit might see it and think, well, it can't be that good. It's not the Pro model, or they'll wait for the Pro model or something like that. So branding-wise, I don't know where they're going other than a simplification, which is welcome if they are just trying to simplify and clean up the naming because it's gotten a bit messy. The fact that we had a 10 series where there was no 10 tells you something's gone wrong in their branding. But I don't know if this is the fix to that. Basically, it's looking a lot like some of the stuff we've heard about the Find X6 Pro. Some of the camera specs we've heard have been pretty similar. There's, again, this sort of suggestion that we're just seeing a lot of cross-pollination between these two. So we've also heard it will have a 50-megapixel main camera. I would not be surprised if that turns out to be an IMX989. We haven't seen that reported by anyone yet, but, I'll go stronger maybe. I'd be shocked if it wasn't the IMX989 at this point.
Yeah, that would honestly be pretty awesome. I'd be disappointed if we didn't see them at least match the Find X series here, right?
And that's exactly right. And that seems to be what we're hearing everywhere across the board. Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, obviously, no surprise there.
Yeah.
Maybe the biggest change that we've heard about this week for the first time is that they might be moving to a ceramic back, which, as you've said, is what we've seen on the Oppo phones and is a really great piece of Oppo's design on its premium ones. And we've not seen OnePlus use that, I don't think.
I mean, it's really nice, right? Like, I'm not going to complain.
The hand feel of a ceramic phone. Great. Love it.
Oh, man. So hot for sure. Yeah, so I don't know. I think I'm excited. I'm kind of rooting for OnePlus. I'm hoping that they can give us something that really uniquely fits, kind of like the markets of North America and Europe and especially I think the UK market, something that really kind of stands against the Samsungs and iPhones of the world, where we can say, okay, look, this is a competitive flagship from OnePlus, because the 10 Pro, we only got the kind of cheaper model, and it was not that cheap. Like, I understand inflation, the supply issues has been an issue, but when you see what some of the competition is doing, what Realme is doing, what even Samsung's able to do, I kind of feel like that the BBK group has enough resources to pull it off and give us something from OnePlus that can stand head to head. Now, I know they're worried to step on Oppo's toes, but they're not really, because to me, the Find X series has always been a high-end premium phone. Like, you don't, yes, spec-wise, it competes with the S22 and the iPhone, but price-wise, it's always kind of had its own little universe. And you don't buy that phone because you're trying to be more, get the best bang for your buck like you do on a OnePlus. You buy that phone because, well, it's super cool and different, and you're still getting a superb experience with superb build quality materials and specs, right? Yeah. So to me, I kind of want to see the OnePlus become the phone that really comes head on with what we accept to be flagships here, right? So let's see if they do that.
Yeah, that's the bit I'm not sure we're going to see. I mean, because as we were saying earlier, the OnePlus phone we want is probably a bit cheaper than the OnePlus phone they're going to make. And a ceramic OnePlus flagship sounds great, but the moment you say it's going to be ceramic, I say, oh, so it's going to be over $1,000, right? And then
for sure,
then suddenly it's just in that same space, the Oppo's in, and it's not, not going down to fight the mainstream Samsung flagship. So I worry this is going to come out and be very close to the Find X6 Pro, and that's going to be the downside. Maybe
it definitely might be. It might be a miss again. I mean, let's hope not. I'm staying positive. I hope they saw the feedback that they got and that they deliver something that I can be excited about. I thought the 10T was really great. I felt that I wish I hadn't cut the alert slider out.
That's sad.
I wish I had wireless charging for this market. It was pretty critical, but everything else about it, I thought it was really well-rounded, and maybe they should have marketed it as a gaming phone, because honestly, it was kind of like a gaming phone. There's nothing wrong with that. I know that they already had the 10 Pro anyway as a flagship, so that would have been a good marketing exercise, but I don't know why they didn't do that. So
yeah, they just do this vague flagship phone, performance phone, but performance is a little broad. I don't know who a performance phone is for.
Yeah, I think gaming would have just made more sense, because you don't necessarily need the trigger buttons to make a good gaming phone, in my opinion.
No, exactly. Yeah,
a lot of games don't support the triggers, is what I mean.
The triggers, yeah.
So we should wrap up. Dom, do you want to tell folks where they can find you on the internet, your social media handles, and tell us about where you write and all that stuff?
Yeah, of course. So main place on my social media is Twitter. I'm at Dom Preston, so you can find me there. I am the deputy editor at TechAdvisor. So if you head to techadvisor.com, you can find everything we're putting out. We are phone-focused site. We're based in the UK editorially, but actually we cover the global market, and we cover US stuff, and we cover everything everywhere, really. And we're also on YouTube, again, TechAdvisor. So you can find me spouting rubbish on video every now and then.
Are you on Instagram by any chance?
I am Dominic.Preston, I think, on Instagram, though it's mostly photos from my holidays and not a whole lot of tech on there.
Right. Yeah, no, I get it. So yeah, folks, check all this stuff out. If you want to chat with me and Dom about this podcast, I'm at TankGirl on Twitter and on Instagram. That's TNKGRL. Think of Tank Girl, the comic book. Just drop all the vowels. That's how you'll remember. So yeah, chat with us on Twitter about this podcast, questions, comments, and then check out my Instagram for pretty pictures of phones, cars, food, travel, all taken with phones. I always tag what phone I use, so check that out. The podcast lives at mobiletechpodcast.com. We're on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Spotify, everywhere good podcasts can be found. So subscribe, tell your friends, use your app to rate and review the show if you can. That would really help. There's a couple of YouTube channels for the podcast that have some unboxing videos and other additional content. YouTube.com/MobileTech is all about the phones and the wearables and personal audio. And we have Mobile Tech More, which is a channel about the rest of the stuff. So, car tech, home automation, travel tech, all that good stuff. You know how YouTube works, so like, subscribe, all that good stuff, the little bell button. Comment, actually, because sometimes people comment about the podcast on the comments of the YouTube channel, and I'm happy to have a conversation with you there. The other thing I want to point out, if you want extra content and you want something a little special, there's a Patreon that you should consider, especially if you want to help me out financially to get this podcast out every week. Patreon.com/TankGirl, that's patreon.com/TNKGRL. There is a video version of the show where you get to see me and Dom chatting, and this is basically coming out a little ahead of the audio public version. So if you want to see the show on video, sometimes there's a little bit additional content because I don't edit it as much, and get it a little ahead of time, check out the Patreon. There's a tier for that. There's a tier for the Discord server you can join to chat with me, and a bunch of other perks there. So please consider helping out. I'd appreciate your support. And if you can't use Patreon for some reason, there's a PayPal link in the show notes. You can click there, make a $5 donation for my coffee habit or whatever. That would be awesome. And I want to thank MediaTek for being our sponsor yet again. MediaTek is the #1 Wi-Fi supplier across broadband, retail routers, consumer electronics devices, and gaming, and is one of the first adopters of Wi-Fi 7. MediaTek's Wi-Fi 7 technology can fulfill the current needs for all the applications consumers enjoy today. Thanks again to MediaTek for being our sponsor this week. And of course, I also want to thank you, Dom, for being my guest this week. Thanks so much for coming on.
No, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. We'll have you on at some point in the future. And folks, we'll have a show next week. So stay tuned for that. And until then, cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.